Well, listen, I want you to know that here, as we are almost to the end of our formal congregational celebration of Christmas 2023, that it takes a lot of work for all of these celebrations. We actually start planning our Christmas, we started planning our Christmas 2023 celebration back in August of 2022. So it's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of energy. There are countless people who are involved in the planning and the execution of our Christmas celebrations. It would be impossible and even counterproductive to try to list every single one of them. But I think you know that one group that is absolutely central to our celebration of Christmas is our choir and orchestra and just all of our music folks. There are just really a handful of churches in the whole world that could do anything close to what we are able to do. And it is because of these folks. We've had guests here throughout the Christmas season, and at some point they look at one of us and go, "Is it like this all the time?" And the answer is yes, it's like this all the time. And it is because of their hard work. There is a whole team involved, but I think you know that special thanks has to go to our pastor of worship and music, Dr. Scott Cannell. You just are. Nobody could do what he does, and we're very thankful for you. He's also, you don't know how generous he is, because after they made his pants and his sweater, they gave me the extra fabric to piece together for these pants. So thank you very much for that. So here we are at Christmas Eve. And I have always thought, but before I became a Christian, before I had ever darkened, as far as I can remember, the door of any church, I had always thought that there was something really special about Christmas Eve. Don't you? Doesn't there just seem to be something special about this night? It's the night before the day that we formally celebrate Jesus coming in the flesh. And I have thought a long time about what it is that seems to make that so special. And I don't know that I've figured everything out, but I know that one thing that is true is that here throughout this season, we have tried really, really hard to think about Christmas, to celebrate Christmas. And now here it is. We're right on the cusp, on the eve of this celebration. And for most of us, there'll be some other family things that we've got to do to piece together as maybe even the weeks go by. But for most of us, in 24 hours, it'll all be over. And here we stand on the eve, and it just seems like the pump is primed. It seems uniquely special. So I've been speaking to you for our Christmas Eve service for several years now, and I always try to do the same thing. When I'm thinking about what I would say, when I'm praying for this time, it's always the same basic thing. I want to help us slow down for a minute right before we rush home and yank the thing out of the oven and do some last minute wrapping and whatever we got to do. I want to help us slow down for just a moment and think about what in the world is really going on here. Tonight, I want to do that by reminding you, or informing you, if you don't know what I'm getting ready to talk to you about something that happened on a Christmas Eve exactly 109 years ago. That's a Christmas Eve of 1914, so you don't have to do the math. And in the lead up to what happened at that Christmas season, you need to know about Europe in the early 1900s and late 1800s. There was a lot going on in Europe at that point, but one thing that was going on was that Germany was trying to do something to displace Great Britain as the dominant naval power in the world. Great Britain had been the dominant naval power for a long time, and Germany wanted to displace them. They'd been trying to do that for a while. And so one of the things that they did, they couldn't create as many ships. They didn't have all the skill and all the training. But one of the things they tried to do was they tried to create a class of ship that they called an Unterseebooten. You know what that is? It kind of sounds like what it is. It's an undersea boat, an underwater boat. This is the precursor to our submarine. And they thought if we could create a boat that could go under the water and be stealth and could strike without being seen or heard, then we wouldn't have to have everything that Great Britain has. And so they called these things U-boats. We call these things U-boats for short. And really what they were in the early 1900s were ships that could be submerged for a little while. They really weren't very effective underwater. They really had all kinds of problems. But by 1914, this was not a hypothetical problem anymore. Because in 1914, Europe was locked in a stalemate. Germany, in particular, was in a stalemate with Great Britain in World War I. The trench warfare would move up a little and back a little, but there was never any great progress. And one of the things that Germany decided they could do to shift the balance of power would be to engage in unrestricted naval warfare. Now, here's what that meant. There was naval warfare, and the boats attacked the boats, but Germany decided, here's what we're going to do. We are going to use our U-boats to strike at any target we want. Any vessel, a merchant ship, any kind of civilian ship, we are going to strike at those boats, and thus we will bring our enemies to their knees. So then, in order to do this, in order to make this kind of warfare work, they really had to improve the U-boat. And so they developed a more modern kind of U-boat. It wasn't anything like what we know as a submarine today, but it was still much more modern. It could stay submerged much longer. They replaced kerosene power for diesel power. This was a good thing because if you burn kerosene, there'd be a white cloud of smoke that would go up in the air, and that makes it visible, which is what you don't for an underwater boat. And diesel power helped with that. These new U-boats were about 210 feet long. They were about 27 feet high and about 20 feet wide. They could carry a crew of 36 men that were jammed down the middle of that thing. And the ships got their name from the number of boat they were. And I want to talk to you tonight about one of those boats. One of those boats that you are probably familiar with, even if you don't know it. The boat was called U-20. U-20. U-20 was well known in the German Navy because it was the first U-boat to circle the entirety of Great Britain. That was a big deal back then. It was also well known. It was having been launched in December of 1912. On January the 1st of 1915, it sunk 3 merchant ships. That is, in one day, it sunk 3 ships that were not hostile ships. Just sunk 3 merchant ships. On February the 1st of 1950, it missed, but it fired at a boat called the Austrias. Now, this was a big deal because the Austrias was a huge ship. It was painted white. It had 3 big red crosses on it, which meant it was a hospital ship. It was there to take care of injured people. And U-20 fired at this hospital ship. So you know this is no boat to be messed with. And then, where you probably have heard of U-20, even though you didn't know it, is on May the 7th, 1915, U-20 fired at and sunk in 18 minutes the Lusitania. The Lusitania was the largest ship in the British Free Fleet. This was a cruise ship. It was a cruise liner. It was a civilian passenger. And they had just over 2,000 passengers on the Lusitania. And just over half of those passengers were killed, having been struck by U-20. This was a big deal. It was one of the most dramatic acts that led to the entrance of the United States into World War I. U-20 had a captain named Walter Schwieger. He became captain of U-20 in December of 1914, and he had a remarkable reputation with his men. They said he was a wonderful soul who wouldn't harm a fly. They were talking about his officers and his men, I think. They said he was the soul of kindness. This man died an early death. He lived by the sword and he died by the sword. On September 5th, 1917, he was sunk when the submarine he was captaining at that point was struck down and sunk by the HMS Stonecrop. And so he died an early death. That's U-20, and that's its captain, Walter Schwieger. But I told you I'd tell you about something that happened 109 years ago tonight. And what happened 109 years ago is U-20, under the command of Captain Schwieger, was sent out on Christmas Eve from port. And this was a bummer. It was a bummer in 1914 for all of the same exact reasons it'd be a bummer in 2023. Everybody wanted to stay home with their families. Everybody wanted to celebrate Christmas at home, but this was not the choice of the folks that were assigned to U-20. So they got on the boat 109 years ago, and they sailed out to sea. And Christmas morning came in 1914, and their task was to find enemy vessels to kill. Now, you know who they're looking for. They're not just looking for boats in the Navy. They're looking for civilian craft. They're looking for hospital ships. They're looking for anything that's floating, and they're going to sink it. And so on Christmas Day of 1915, they rise to the surface, and all day long, they're looking all around. They described it as a beautiful, crystal clear blue day. You could see endlessly, it seemed, in every direction. And the whole day, they never found an enemy vessel to shoot down. And it was such a stunning development that they didn't see one vessel. Captain Schwieger even asked one of his officers, "I wonder why we can't find a boat to shoot." And this officer replied, "Well, I guess the other boats are celebrating Christmas as any Christian should." Well, the day came to an end. It was darkness. And as Captain Schwieger examined his sea charts, he noted that the floor of the ocean where they were was sandy and not rocky. And so he gave an order. He gave an order to his men to submerge the ship and to rest it on the ocean floor. Now, in one sense, this is a very unusual order. What are we going to go all the way down to the bottom for? In another sense, it's not so unusual because if you're a U-boat, it is, in a day before radar, this is the one place where the boat is safe. Rested on the sandy bottom of the ocean. You can't be rammed by a battleship. You can't be run over by a ship you didn't see. And so this huge U-boat, this weapon of death, descends all the way down to the ocean floor. And there it rests in the sand. And all is quiet. They have to listen for the hiss or the gush of flowing water. It's quiet for a little bit when Captain Schwieger hears all throughout the boat, "Alles ist dicht." All is tight. This thing is holding together. And once he realizes that they are safe on the sandy bottom of the ocean, once he realizes that their vessel is safe from water, he looks at his crew and he smiles and he says, "Now we celebrate Christmas." And he gave orders for the officers to come in to the crew's mess where they would eat. They filled up the table with their cans of food. They hung a wreath at the end of the mess hall. And they engaged in an evening of speeches and dancing and singing. One man reported that we had a veritable orchestra aboard because they found a man, even on a submarine. One had a violin, one had a mandolin, and one had an accordion. And so they sang and clapped and celebrated Christmas into the night while they are surrounded by the darkness of the depths of the ocean. Now, isn't that something? A German battle cruiser, a German U-boat, celebrating Christmas at the bottom of the sea. It gets me thinking about an ancient prophecy about the birth of Jesus. An ancient prophecy from Isaiah of old. And thousands of years ago, in a prophecy you might have heard before, in Isaiah 9:2, he says, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone." Those are wonderful words. They're wonderful words, and they say more than you might at first think they say. Darkness is biblical language for sin and unrighteousness. And light is biblical language for righteousness and goodness. When Isaiah says the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light, he's talking about the birth of Jesus. He's talking about rays of righteousness coming out of this infant boy into a dark world. That light that comes from Christ is so bright that it lights up all kinds of darkness. It's so bright, this light, that it illumines all sin. This light includes Jesus' life and death and resurrection, so that anyone, if you would turn from your darkness and your sin to his bright light and trust in him and love him, you would be forgiven and have life and light forever. This light is so bright that it could illumine the darkness in your heart in 2023. 109 years later, this light could brighten up a Christmas that maybe when we leave here, you're not looking forward to some of the things you've got to do. But the light of Christ is so bright, it can lighten up this Christmas. This light is so bright, it just amazes me that it shines into the darkness of the hearts of enemy killers. It shines into the darkness of a seabed beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Isaiah couldn't have imagined that the light he was preaching would reach to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, but it did. That's how bright it is. Don't ever think that the light of Christ is not strong enough and powerful enough and long enough to reach into the darkness of any darkness you know, whether that's your heart or the heart of a loved one or a difficulty you're going into this Christmas. The light of Christ reaches you. It reaches you now. It reaches your family and friends. We're going to sing in just a little bit this famous carol. We're going to sing about how in the coming of Jesus, all is calm and all is bright. And I hope you will believe that. I hope that will have fresh meaning for you this Christmas. If the brightness of Christ's everlasting righteousness can reach into the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, then it can reach you where you are, and it can reach your family where they are. And I'm going to pray for you right now that that brightness will shine. So let's pray.